So welcome to the latest in our series of webinars from the Sustainable Business Network. This one's a particular of interest to certainly a lot of us who are producing waste. It's a particular headache for ourselves in the guest and hospitality sector, where we've got people bringing their own waste onto site as well as producing waste ourselves. But hopefully it's all important for everybody, and it's been a long time coming, this simplification of local authority waste collections, and it will make life a lot easier when everyone is collecting the same materials for recycling across the whole country. Our programme for today, we're going to start with a sort of background and the legal update, and also any other bits and pieces that are coming up that you need to be aware of before moving on to our main speakers, who will be talking about how the new legislation is going to impact different types of businesses across our region. That's enough from me. So I'm going to hand you over to Wendy, who's going to talk about some of the background and legislation that's coming up. Wendy.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Duncan, for inviting me to speak here. I should say happy Valentine's Day as well here. And this Valentine's Day, we love recycling, and that's the topic of today's presentations. Now, I'm just going to give a market and legal update. I think a lot of you know me from the work we do with the North Hants SBN as well. I'm client director over here at Carbon Footprint. I would never profess to be an expert at all in waste, so I'm learning like you today. And probably as I go through some of this, and I'll just touch on some of the things with key dates here, amongst other legislation, I'll be asking the same sort of questions that you will. And I know with our expert speakers who are going to follow on from me, are going to fill in really on those details that affect all of us in our businesses. Things that have gone on in the last 6 weeks, we've seen the wildfires in LA. We've also experienced storms ourselves, and some of the highest winds that we've ever seen in Ireland, shown pictorially there. Obviously, this fella entered the White House and all that goes with that. And we've seen the expansion of Heathrow Airport and all the negotiations going on with that. Top right, maybe something slightly drier. A lot of people have been getting these notices about ESOS, compliance notices, and we'll say a little bit more about that in just 1 second. Donald Trump is back in the White House. He is out of Paris as well, and that surprised no one. And I think really the world is going forward in spite of, not because of, and that's all I'm going to say about that today. We could focus a lot on that, but I'm going to bring out the positives here. With that as the background, we know that Copernicus has also reported the first breaching of 1.5 Celsius, which is significant. Obviously, at the moment, that's not sustained, but that's the first year that has been breached, and you can see directionally from that curve, it doesn't look great, and the action for climate change is needed now. Let's move things a little closer to home with ESOS, and this is probably the most looming part of legislation we need to be aware of. If you are in a large business, then you'll know that you'll need to comply with the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. You might think, well, I've already done that, but here's the thing. The action plan is still needed, and that's needed for the 5th of March. And just to clarify on this, even if you're not planning to carry out any energy reductions in your business, you still need to submit a plan saying that's what you're doing or that's what you're not doing. If you don't do that, then you could be liable to fines. So something to watch out for. It is very straightforward, and we have actually covered this in a previous SBN session that I'll move to in a second. The portal for putting your action plan is open, so do make sure that you're filling that in. Obviously, if you do get stuck, then give us a shout over here at Carbon Footprint, and we're happy to help you. Still on ESOS, a lot of folks have been getting compliance notices from the Environment Agency. In the previous SBN, we actually went through what those look like. So if you want to grab the QR code on that, or the link when you see the presentation in YouTube, that will take you through what that looks like and the types of timelines that they give you to be able to comply with. So do have a look at that if you're unfortunately in possession of one of those letters there. We have had news as well about the next phases of ESOS, which are phase 4 and phase 5. As you recall, phase 3 has just recently ended, and it may be disappointing for some of you that net zero is not going to be part of phase 4. We did expect it to be in, but the EA has said that they don't want to make changes to ESOS whilst the phase is actually active. And I think this is a reasonable approach because during phase 3, some changes were made very, very late in the day and upset a lot of people, particularly because some of those changes were actually just 6 months before the end of what is a 4-year window. So very, very close to the end, and that upset a lot of people. I think the EA's made the right decision there to not change what's going to be in the phase as they go through. I think there's another reason for doing this is it's all well and good having net zero as one of the obligations on ESOS, but it does require there to be a common understanding of what net zero is. And until we get to COP30 happening in November, when the ISO standard actually comes out, we won't actually have that universal definition of what net zero is. So I think that's part of their reasoning here of holding that back. However, net zero will be in phase 5, so we get there eventually. Phase 4 will be rolling out some new methodologies for the way the energy audits are carried out, and also requirements on energy auditors themselves. That's coming out from BSI this month. We haven't seen it yet, but we'll be sure to keep you updated in these sessions as soon as that goes live. Let's get to simply recycling. And now Kirstin and I have been talking about the sort of mixed history of this legislation. And it's been really interesting because whilst we've been inviting people in, we've had people comment and, oh, does this work in my area, or does this work in my region of the UK? And it's quite interesting because there seem to be slightly different interpretations and slightly different versions depending on where you are in the UK. So for Wales and Scotland, the requirements are slightly different. I know a lot of you are down here in the southeast of England. We're going to focus on what we say on this today in the main presentations around that. So just be aware of that. In the news, you can see here that this policy update has been made quite late. This legislation has been in development for a good while, but here we are with a notice from, late on in 2024 when after the Labour administration took over. It's that, things have been happening very recently. You can have a look at that via the QR code, so please do grab that and take a look-see. Just a couple of days ago in The Caterer, which I think is a very respected online news resource for the food industry, a little statement about this. And as I say, Kirstin and I were looking at thinking, okay, yeah, that's true for the 10 full-time employees, that's true. The 5 kilo issue of food waste comes up quite a bit. And Kirstin, I think this applies to Wales and not to England.
Yes, that's correct.
But others, yeah, please do jump in on this. There's quite some misinformation out there, so you need to be really careful where you take your information from. And as with any type of legislation, please do go back to source. And I think what we're going to hear in the presentations today is talk to your local authority, talk to your waste provider, talk to DEFRA if you're unsure. If you're implementing something one way rather than another, and you don't know what to do, get onto DEFRA and just check, get things in writing. Just a little bit of back history. The origins of the Act are from 2021. As we've been pointing out there, there have been several iterations of this, even up to the last moment. Key dates you need to be aware of. We've got the first phase of this really happening from the end of next month. If you have 10 or more full-time employees, FTEs, here. Okay, this is a little different from ESOS, which I think refers to any employees, you know, to 0-hour contracts. Didn't matter for that. Here we're talking FTEs. Okay, there is a next stage in 26, which relates to households, and in the following year, 2027, we then see this go down to micro businesses of less than 10 employees, and I know there's quite a few businesses online here who this will affect. So the legislation is coming to you. It's purely a matter of the timing of that. There are some useful resources on there with, as I say, with different levels of accuracy. BIFA's website's pretty good there. Other waste providers are available, so please do check out folks like that. And Duncan just asked me to say something about the extended producer responsibilities. This is the packaging responsibilities that sort of go hand in glove with the simpler recycling. And you'll recall this affects businesses who are the producers of packaging. If we got any legal people online now who would like to define that, that would be great. If you're one of the presenters, please speak up. If you're one of the delegates, pop it in the chat. I understand that producer here also includes someone who might be importing that packaging as well. If you know better than me, which you may well, please put it in the chat there. Those are the parameters: 1 million turnover, so it's not a huge amount, and 25 tonnes. Those are the things there to look out for. The point I wanted to make here, and the change I think we were all expecting, was around labelling, which I understand has been delayed. So to be able to have that on packaging would be great about what you need to do. But according to BIVTA here, which links through to a press release from DEFRA, this has been delayed by a little bit. I think the intention still is to put that live this year, but we will see. Let's finally go briefly to fines, and a couple of things to mention here. We can all read off what those are. We're still seeing water companies fall foul of the law and still get quite eye-watering, or pardon the pun, fines for transgressions. And obviously the government has got a review of the sector in place, and I would suggest this can't come soon enough. Here's another example of a fine for quite considerable amount of waste being dumped. I'd say with this, actually, the fines that were actually given, I'd say were relatively low. It looks as though this has been a business, and okay, so 2 of the directors have been banned from being company directors for the foreseeable. But we're still not seeing any custodial sentences there, which probably would make all the difference. So that is fines. Just a little bit of homework for you there. If you'd like to read up a little bit more about the things that I've mentioned here, please do go check out the references here, and you'll be able to click through those in the YouTube recording. So that's me for today, and I'm just going to do another plug for Duncan's poll there. There's still a little bit of time for you to get online and have a look at that, so please do click away at the QR code, and I think, Miles, if you could pop that link back in there, the long link, into the chat so you can have a look at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. Well, actually, there's roughly the same question twice in the chat about the 10 employees, and just asking to confirm whether that's per location or for the company as a whole. So if you've got 5 people in one premises and 5 in another, are you included, or does that exclude you?
Yeah, Kirstin and I were just talking about that yesterday afternoon, because this does become quite a point of confusion. And I'm gonna, Kirstin, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. So my understanding is that if you have 10 or more FTE across all of your locations, then it applies to you. So it's per organisation, not per location. That's for businesses. It may be slightly different for relevant non-domestic premises, which I believe is per premises. So it's a little bit, it is a bit of a complicated area, and I will touch on it during my presentation as well, just to try and give a bit more clarity. But I do think that if you are a business, it's across your entire organisation. So you might have a branch, a main branch with 5 FTEs, and then you might have 2 smaller branches with 3 each. That would mean that you have to comply by the end of this month. That's my understanding of it, but I will talk about that again.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because the only way that wouldn't be the case is if those businesses were separate entities. So I'm thinking if it was some kind of a franchise and actually those are separate legal entities, then that wouldn't apply. So it's down to what your LTD is effectively. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And then we've got a similar question about the 5 kilogram limit. If that's across a whole organisation or per location, or if it doesn't apply in England.
Oh, this is an interesting one, isn't it, Kirstin? We've been seeing all sorts of variants on this. I'll defer to you on this as well.
Yeah, so I have scoured the regulations for England very thoroughly, and as far as I can tell, but obviously you're welcome to take your own legal advice, this does not apply in England. There is no lower limit. So if you produce any waste that is similar to household waste, so even 1 tea bag, this applies to your organisation. So unfortunately, that only applies in Wales. It's the only place I've been able to see the regulation.
Okay, thank you. And then a question about whether our business is expected to procure waste companies to deal with have this recycling for food waste, or whether local authorities will take it.
That's also going to be a question that it depends on where you are located in the country, I think is the answer to that one. If your local authority happens to run a commercial service, so they already collect commercially from businesses, then you could apply to your local authority for them to come and collect from your business. You would have to pay like any other business. It's not a free service, if that makes sense. So local authorities who provide the service generally don't do it for free. In Winchester district, we don't have a commercial arm. So we would be unable to collect your waste. You would need to find a private provider to come and collect your waste. It's the same for us as a landlord. So we are a landlord. I'm sorry, I'm talking for Winchester City Council here. We are a landlord in various locations across the district, and so this applies to us in most of those locations by the end of the month. And we subcontract out to a waste collection provider, and we have to make sure that they are complying with the new regulations and that our tenants know that they need to comply with the new regulations and separate out their waste and recycling. Did that answer the question, or did I go on a tangent? Sorry.
I think that answered the question. We'll see if they come back to us. I'm not sure whether you'll know this one because it's one of the questions we've been struggling with at work. There's a question about producing waste and whether, as an employer, and the waste that is produced by your employees is one thing, but if you have visitors and customers, like in a shopping centre or in our case at the zoo, whether the waste that they produce because they've bought a sandwich or they've brought some food with them, does that waste that's arising on your premises count as waste you are producing and therefore you need to collect, or is that somebody else's responsibility or the customer's own responsibility?
Well, I think you're right. It is a slightly less clear area in the legislation. I would say that my view on it, and this may not be other people's views, is, well, actually, I've got a slide on it, so maybe I'll just cover it when I get there.
Okay.
There is some different rules as to if you are an employee and you produce waste. Let's say you bring your sandwiches and you don't want to eat the crusts. That's waste that you've produced. Therefore, it needs to be dealt with under the new regulations. Again, you could have a customer who comes in, brings a sandwich, doesn't want to eat the crusts. What do we do in that situation? Well, there are some there is a little bit of guidance around that, but I think it's going to be harder for places that already provide bins for customers, because if you provide a bin for your customer, you're going to have to comply with the new regulations. You're going to have to provide the same set of bins. But you don't have to provide bins for your customers. That's the line that we have in the guidance. But in a place like a zoo, I'm not quite sure how that would work.
No, neither are we.
Yeah.
Can I just add in, actually, for my company's own experience, we're based in actually in Basingview, and in a property is actually managed by Zulfiya, who's on the call as well. So we have serviced accommodation, and we're asking exactly that same question of our team, obviously bringing in their sandwiches and thinking, do we need to separate them, or do we need to ask them to take waste from their sandwiches home with them? So I'm sure that discussion point is common amongst people who are on the call here, and is something that Kirstin, Zulfiya are going to tackle slightly later on in what we talk about. So it'd be good to hear their takes on that as they go through their presentations.
Okay, I think, yes, there's lots of questions coming in which are all on some of themes. So I think we'll let the other speakers talk and come back to at the end if we think we still haven't answered it. Otherwise, we are going to get stuck. Just a question that has come in that's slightly different, just about who provides the additional bins, and how is the collection going to happen. And I imagine that is going to be down to the relationship between you and your waste contractor, as to how that collection actually happens. In our case, we have to provide the bins, and then the waste contractor empties them. They're providing the small kitchen type caddies, and we're providing the bigger bins that we empty the caddies into, so they then, the waste company then empty them. So that decision is going to be down to between you and your waste collector. And I think, yeah, we'll come back to everything else at the end and see if we can clarify it after the other speakers have spoken. So I shall hand over to Kirstin, so we don't get too far behind.
Here we go. Right. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm sorry, I should have done that before I started speaking. I'm the Senior Project Manager for Winchester City Council, working to implement the changes to households that are coming by the 31st of March 2026. And while I'm very flattered to be called an expert, I do want to make it clear that I'm not a lawyer, nor am I actually an expert on waste regulations, but my role does immerse me in all things waste and recycling. So I am happy to provide a high-level overview of some of the issues and some clarity on some of the changes that are likely to impact businesses, which of course includes the council in its role as a landlord and a property owner across the district. So I'll give as much insight as I have, but I always encourage you to review the policy for yourself. And I've included some links to information that you might find helpful at the end. And I'll also be answering any questions that you have if I'm able to. So, as Wendy said, Simpler Recycling is a government policy that aims to make recycling consistent for everyone. So no matter where you are in England, whether you're at home, at work, at school, you should be able to deal with your waste in the same way and recycle the same core set of materials. So the idea is to create a consistent way of recycling. And that would help to lower the contamination rates by taking away the confusion that there currently is about what can and can't be recycled. What I can recycle certain things at home, but I can't recycle them at work, for example. So once all of this has been fully introduced, I will put a caveat there, particularly for those of us who are in Hampshire. At the moment, some of the disposal infrastructure doesn't exist to be able to take all of the waste streams that Simpler Recycling requires. So, for example, for households, and this may not apply to businesses, so there will still be a little bit of confusion for a little while. For households, you can't currently recycle pots, tubs and trays, plastic pots, tubs and trays at home until the new material recycling facility has been built, which is hopefully going to be built by the end of 2027. So in a few years' time, this this aim of having a consistent collection across all locations, across all of England, will be in place, but there is going to be a little bit of a transition period where things might not be quite as simple as we'd like with simpler recycling. So the aim is to increase the types of recycling that we can do by increasing the materials that should be recycled, and then reduce the amount that's sent to landfill or incinerated. So this is part of an essential shift that aims to help meet the government's very ambitious target to recycle 65% of municipal waste, and that's by 2035. I don't have figures for current municipal recycling rates, but I can say for households, the rates in England have hovered around 44 to 45% since 2015. So there is definitely a need for change and improvement. So this is a step in the right direction. It may just take a little time to implement all of it. So who's going to be affected? Well, the simplest answer is almost everyone is going to be affected by these reforms in the next few years. So households, businesses, and relevant non-domestic premises. But households are on a slightly different timetable, so these slides are going to focus on the changes for businesses and relevant non-domestic premises. The government guidance states that any business or workplace premises that generates waste that is similar in nature and composition to household waste must follow these rules across their operations, including, for example, staff kitchens. This includes all relevant non-domestic premises. So we've already talked about some of the confusion that's coming in with some of the misinterpretation. I think what happens is if you do a Google search on simpler recycling, this is improving, I have to say. Over the last few months, it's certainly become more clear and more accurate. But prior to the latest policy announcement or policy change, which was in November last year, there was quite a lot of confusion as to which parts of legislation relate to which parts of the UK. So there are slightly different rules in Scotland, slightly different rules in Wales. So the 5 kilogram limit is an example of that. So it's always important to just go back to the source, go back to the DEFRA information that's available online. I'd say that's the most accurate place to get your information from. So other than being a mouthful that I need to say several times in this presentation, what is a relevant non-domestic premises? So I've put a list on the screen, and this is taken from the latest government guidance, which was provided in November, but it does contain the caveat that it's not an exhaustive list. So if you find that you don't fit any of the categories on this list, you should check the relevant legislation to confirm if you are affected. And I'll give you a moment just to review the list. There may be some on there that you weren't expecting. Obviously, this will be recorded, so if you need to pause and take a thorough review, you can do that at your leisure afterwards. So this is the big question. What do I need to do? How do I make sure that I comply? And for some businesses, the biggest change is going to be that you can no longer use your general waste bin for everything. So any core recyclable material that can be recycled must be recycled. It can no longer be sent to landfill or incinerators. And the government has divided these core recyclable materials into 3 separate streams. So the first one is glass, metals and plastics, such as glass bottles and jars, tin cans, drink cans, plastic bottles. Under the new rules, these can be collected in one bin. However, there is the question of what recycling facilities are available in your local area. Some of these are not set up to deal with glass included with other dry recycling materials. So you may need to keep glass separate if that's how your service provider needs to collect it. So I would check with your provider before you make any changes to how you collect your recycling and suddenly start throwing your glass in with everything else, because they might not be able to recycle it if it's commingled in that way. The next we have is paper and card, such as flattened packaging material. If you have recycling collections at your premises, you probably already include paper and card in with your plastic and drinks cans. But under the new regulations, these should by default be collected separately from other dry recycling. And there is a handy little star there that says, unless your waste collector collects them together. So the first thing you should do is ask your current service provider how they intend to deal with paper and card, and that will then determine what you need to do to comply. There is provision under the new rules for waste collectors to do a written assessment, which can show that it is either technically or economically or environmentally not practicable, or there is no significant environmental benefit to collecting paper and cards separately. So this, some of you will know, this is known as a TEEP assessment. And if you want to find out more about that, you can check out the RAP website. There will be a link at the end of the presentation. This responsibility does seem to rest with the waste collector rather than the waste producer, but I would urge you to check this with your waste service provider and review the guidance from DEFRA. From what I understand, it is the waste collector's responsibility, but I've also seen information online that suggests that for safety, maybe a waste producer should also undertake that written assessment, and maybe all it says is my waste collection provider co-collects it, therefore I have to co-collect it, because it certainly wouldn't be technically, economically or environmentally practicable to separate it if then your waste service provider is just going to throw it all back in one bin again. So there is that. Food waste. Now, this is the one that's getting the most coverage and obviously needs to be kept separate from everything else. By its very nature, it can contaminate other waste streams if it's co-collected with anything else. Some local areas already collect food waste from households, so you may be familiar with the process. But food waste in the workplace, I think, is likely to be new for a lot of organisations, and that includes Winchester City Council. So food waste obviously includes any food leftovers, food that is uneaten because it's gone bad. And we all have experience of that mouldy something at the back of the fridge that's been left there for 3 months by a colleague. It includes plate scrapings, vegetable, fruit peelings, tea bags, stale biscuits, anything that could have been eaten that wasn't eaten. And for some, it may really only be the odd apple core, banana peel or sandwich crust. But all of these can and should be recycled under the new regulations. And of course, I mean, most premises, at the very least, are going to produce a pile of used tea bags every day, which can also be recycled. So these are your 3 recycling streams. Then you have your general waste, which of course you keep separate from your recycling, and that is anything that cannot be recycled. So there should, in theory, be a reduction in how much general waste you are collecting if you are separating out all of these other recyclable materials. So in a nutshell, sorry, this is a lot of words here. In essence, you will always need to have at least 3 bins to separate your dry recyclable waste, your food waste, and your black bin, your residual general waste, from each other. So most of you will have a waste collection of some kind, and your current service provider may be able to expand these to include a food waste collection to help you comply with the new regulations. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but there is a little bit of good news. There's 2 things, actually. You can find out more about this on the DEFRA guidance on gov.uk. But workplaces can decide on the size of containers and the frequency of collections based on the volume of waste they produce. So there's a degree of autonomy here that based on how much or how little you produce, you can work with your service provider to develop a collection program that works for you. And there's no mandate that you have to collect certain streams on a weekly or fortnightly basis in a container of a specified size. You can decide this for yourself. Although I would, of course, caution you on leaving food waste for too long, because this could start to smell and attract unwanted attention. But the other thing, the second part of the good news, is that you do not need to provide bins for your customers. However, if you do provide bins, the same rules will apply, and you will need to separate dry recyclable waste, food waste, and black bin waste. So you will need to have that 3 bin minimum if you provide bins for your customers. So that's something that each individual company is going to have to think about. When do we need to do it? Well, for any business and relevant non-domestic premises with 10 or more FTE staff, the deadline is by the 31st of March this year. For micro firms with less than 10 FTE staff, it's by the 31st of March 2027. And just going to make sure that everybody knows this. I'm sure you already do, but if you're not familiar with the acronym FTE, it stands for full-time equivalent. So if you have a part-time employee who works 20 hours per week and a full-time employee works 40 hours per week, the part-time employee's FTE is 0.5 and your full-time employee obviously is 1.0. So the criteria is not about having 10 or more staff. It's if you have 10 or more full-time equivalent staff. And for businesses, this should be calculated over the entire organization. So as I said before, if you have a main office with 6 FTE staff and a couple of branches with 3 FTE staff each, the new regulations will apply from the end of March this year. How can you prepare? Okay, this is what you really need to know, I guess. The first thing is to make sure you understand the new regulations so that you can comply. And DEFRA funded the Waste and Resources Action Programme, which we affectionately call WRAP, to develop the Business of Recycling website. And this has loads of really helpful information, lots of useful tools that can help you to prepare for these changes. It also has tips on how you can reduce your waste, which could help you save money. So that's a really excellent starting point. Next thing you should do is contact your waste service provider and see what services they can offer you. Hopefully they'll already have contacted you to make you aware of the upcoming changes, but if not, they should be your first point of contact. Service providers should be fully versed in the new regulations and be able to offer additional or amended services to help you comply. At the very least, they should be able to point you in the direction of someone who can help if they can't. And the question that I don't know if anyone's asked this yet, but what about if you are a tenant and you have a landlord or a management company that arranges your waste collections? In this case, both the waste producer, that is the tenant, and the landlord or the management company have a responsibility. They're slightly different. So the landlord or management company, if they employ a waste contractor for you, this company has a legal obligation to make sure any separated recyclables are collected and sent for recycling, and that any residual waste is correctly disposed of. However, the tenant still has ultimate responsibility as the waste producer. So you need to make sure that you keep your dry recyclables and your food waste separated from your general waste. So that's the 3-bin minimum that we talked about earlier. So I would encourage you, if that is your circumstance, that you should check the arrangements also for the separation of paper and card. So if your waste collector collects these in the same container with other dry recyclables such as plastic and metal, you can continue to present it in this way. So the conversation really needs to be with your waste service provider. And if you have a landlord, get them involved as well, just to make sure that everyone is complying. This might be really helpful for smaller businesses. If you have some near business neighbours, you might be able to club together to save by sharing recycling collections. So you don't have to do it on your own. And this also applies if you are in a business park, for example. Well, I would imagine you'd have a managed service then, but if you are in an area where there are multiple smaller shops located or smaller businesses located near each other, you could share your collections. But just make sure that you have all of you get all of the relevant copies of the paperwork that you need to demonstrate compliance, because you might need to demonstrate that you are collecting or have collections in the correct way. You can also demonstrate that, of course, by showing these are our different bins and this is how we collect our separate our recycling from our residual waste. You will need to prepare your waste and recycling stations within your organisation with additional containers for the different recycling streams. Now, this is something that your waste collection provider, I think this was already discussed earlier, they might be able to help you with, because many offer container solutions as well as collections. So discuss that with them. And then prepare your staff for the change. I think this is a really important one that sometimes gets missed. You need to make sure that your bins are clearly, properly labelled, that your staff know what should go in each bin so that you avoid contamination and any penalties that may come with contamination. So under the new rules, a waste collector will not be able to collect contaminated bins, and they may have to charge you extra for picking them up on another day. But I'll talk more about contamination and penalties in the next slide. And finally, I'm sure you can't wait for me to stop talking. Monitor and measure to make sure that your waste and recycling solution that you've chosen is working for you. As I mentioned before, there's no set sizes for bins or frequency of collections for businesses. So you may have to tweak your collection arrangements until they're right for you. So keep an eye on what you're producing. You might want to encourage your staff to reduce waste as well as recycling it. If you waste less, recycle more, you might find that you greatly reduce the amount of residual waste that you produce. And if it gets low enough, maybe you can reduce your collections from, let's say, every 2 weeks to every 3 weeks, for example, maybe even every 4 weeks, because you won't have any food waste in there, so it won't smell. And this could save you money. And of course, it should result in a lower carbon footprint for your business. Oh, goodness. So if you don't comply with these requirements by the deadlines that have been provided, you will be at risk of receiving a compliance notice from the Environment Agency. The EA will be the ones responsible for enforcement. And also from April 25, anyone can report a business that is in breach of these rules, and the Environment Agency could investigate as a result. The new rules will make it unlawful for a waste collector to collect contaminated materials. So just quickly, what is contamination? This happens either when someone puts the wrong thing in the wrong bin. So for example, someone might throw a plastic bottle into the food waste bin, or when the material itself becomes cross-contaminated. And this example is someone, I think we all know about this one, is the pizza box. If you throw a pizza box into your paper and card bin, but it's contaminated with oil and food residue, that contaminates your whole bin. So I think that's a really important consideration, especially when you're relaying this information to your staff, to make sure that they know what goes in and what doesn't go in. From April 25, waste collectors are required to report non-compliance to the Environment Agency. So that's slightly different to contamination. I would imagine, and I know this certainly is the case for companies that we work with, if they are identifying contamination, they will obviously not be able to collect that bin, and they will let you know you've contaminated this particular bin, and they'll tell you what you've done wrong, which will be really helpful because then you can make sure it doesn't happen again. They won't be, as far as I understand, under the new regulations, they are not obligated to report contamination to the Environment Agency, but they are obligated to report non-compliance. That means if you refuse to separate your food waste out from your general waste, for example, and you're not presenting any food waste, you're not presenting dry recyclable waste, they would then be obliged to report that to the Environment Agency. So how do you demonstrate compliance? Well, you will need to show that you are separating and presenting your waste and recycling for collection in accordance with the new rules. You will also need to get a waste transfer note from your waste collection service provider, and you are requested to keep this document for 2 years, because you might be asked to present it if an enforcement officer from the Environment Agency asks to see it. So I encourage you to check out the information on the WRAP website for further guidance on this, and also speak to your service provider. And this is obviously especially important if you choose to share a service with a business neighbour, because both businesses need to demonstrate compliance. Whew, and finally, here are some useful links that you should be able to, I think it's control-click on a PDF once these have been circulated to everyone. But that's just a brief overview of the key points. I'm hoping that I will be able to answer any questions that you might have. And I will stop sharing at that point.
Well, don't stop just that. Oh, never mind.
Sorry.
So yes, that's all right. I was going to ask you to go back to the slide with the multiple bins on it.
Okay.
If
Yeah.
you could.
I can do that.
Chat's been very active, so I will try and capture all these questions. But if I miss anything, please ask your question again, and we'll see if we can pick it up at the end. You kind of covered this point in that slide with the multiple bins on it, but there's just a question about if your contractor, your waste contractor, is offering, does a sort at their premises of your waste into the different recycling streams, and what's therefore the minimum you need to do. So like my contractor, we have a dry mixed recyclable with the paper and the card and the plastic bottles and the cans. Is that acceptable now, or do we need to separate the paper from the cans, kind of thing?
That's very much going to depend on what they need to do. So they will most likely have a contract with a disposal partner. So there are some collectors, waste collectors, who are also waste disposers. So it's kind of a separation of the roles. If you collect waste, you're not necessarily responsible for disposing of it. So there are separate companies who dispose of waste. For example, I think Veolia is a very good example of that one. And it will very much depend on what facilities are available. So if the facility has been set up to co-mingle, to collect together your paper, card and metals and plastics, it would be quite difficult to justify separating those out to be collected and then throwing them all back together again to be sorted and processed for recycling. So I think that's where the company that's doing the collecting will do that TEEP assessment, so that they can demonstrate that it's just not practicable for them to separate it out if the disposal facility wants it all commingled together. The exception to that, I think, is glass. So at the moment, I think it's something like 67% of facilities can't accept glass commingled in with your metals, plastics, paper and card. So until that infrastructure is built, we're probably going to have to keep glass separate as a separate collection until those new facilities are built, and then we'll be able to throw everything in that one bin as it's outlined on the slide that you can see now. Does that make sense?
Yep, I think that answered the question, because you mentioned a sort of minimum of 3 bins. So
yes.
The food has always got to be separate. I think that's the
food
key
has
thing.
always got to be separate. At the moment, we think that glass, metals, plastics, paper and card can go together where they can go together, if that makes sense.
So it's ask your waste contractor.
Exactly. Ask your waste contractor. They will be able to help you with that.
Yeah. Okay, Wendy, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, we shouldn't forget the survey on how people are getting on with their recycling. I know there's a question or so more, but once we're through with the questions here, if we could show the survey results, that would be really good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, Kirstin, sorry, could you remind us what TEEP stands for?
Yes, it's whether something is technically, economically, environmentally practicable.
Right, thank you. And we just had a question about whether, in the same way with the 10 employees is per company, not per site, does the TEEP assessment have to be done by site or for your organisation altogether?
So my understanding of the regulation is that if there are differences across the different sites, then you need a TEEP assessment for each site.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We had another question about the multi-sites and whether you're 10 employees, but specifically if people are remote working and working from home, what's your obligation for collecting waste when people working at home?
That is an excellent question that I had actually not considered. I would imagine that some common sense would prevail, and that there is no work premises, in which case it would be household waste. Right. So the waste producer isn't producing waste in a business location.
Thank you very much. Obviously, we should be encouraging our employees to collect their food waste wherever they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we've also had a couple of questions about food packaging, which I think you kind of answered through the pizza example,
Yes.
around sort of contaminated sandwich boxes, cans of soup. Specifically, there's a question about coffee grounds and the little, like the capsule coffee things.
Yes,
So the coffee grounds would presumably be food waste,
they would.
but the capsule that's got coffee grounds left in it, or the sandwich tinner that's got the crust left in it, what's the
For
requirement
food,
there?
yeah, for food waste, it's very important to realize that it's the food only, the organic matter. So let's say you had a sandwich in its original packaging from Sainsbury's, or other locations they also sell sandwiches, I need to hasten to add, and it's been left in the back of the work fridge for a month. It's clearly out of date and unusable, unedible. You would need to then remove it from its packaging and put that in the food waste on its own, just the moldy sandwich. The packaging you would need to deal with in terms of how your waste collector is what they're able to collect. So this is where the confusion is going to be for a few years. So, for example, from households, we have a contract with Hampshire County Council, who then have a contractor who deals with the household waste. And because of the way that their materials recovery facility is set up, they can't recycle plastic pots, tubs, trays, or Tetra Paks, cartons, anything like that. So at the moment, although under the new regulations from March, everyone should be able to recycle pots, tubs, and trays, as a household, you won't be able to do that until the new material recovery facility has been built. So there are differences with commercial providers. Some of them are able to go to different disposal facilities, which can take pots, tubs, and trays, for example. So it would be really important for you to work with your service provider, ask them exactly what can go in this bin and what can't in terms of your recyclables. Because there's also confusion, and this is where EPR was going to come in and save the day. There's no real regulation at the moment in terms of what a company can put on their packaging to say whether it's recyclable or not. And so I'm constantly having a battle at home where I'm taking things out of the recycle bin and putting them in the general waste bin. And my husband will say, but why? It says you can recycle it. It's got the little recycle symbol. But that doesn't mean that it's currently recyclable in our area. So it's very much determined by what the company you're contracted with is able to do.
Right. Thank you. And actually, I had a question about just how much effort you're required to put in, and is there a sort of reasonableness measure that says, right, I've put the bins out, but I can't guarantee people are going to use them. So, getting the food waste out of the recycling is the important bit. If actually I've still got food waste in the general waste, am I going to get penalised because I haven't collected 100% of my food waste, or is making an effort good enough?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think we won't know the answer to that until enforcement actions start to happen. I mean, that's my honest answer is I suspect, and from my reading of the regulations, is maximum effort is required, and you should absolutely separate out anything that can be recycled must be recycled. But that's going to come down to individual operations and individual businesses and how much they're willing to push that with their employees, and how much they're willing to educate their employees and help and spend time on this to get it right. But of course, there will be a financial penalty, because if you keep contaminating your bins, your waste provider is not able to collect it. So that they will charge you for an additional collection. They'll come back and collect it as residual waste, but they will charge you for it.
Yeah.
So there will be some sort of a penalty imposed in that way, I guess.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Chat is still very active, but we better move on. So we'll see if we can answer the questions in the chat while we hand over to Rebecca, who's going to talk about a sort of more of a case study of an individual business. So,
thank you very much. Oh, Wendy, did you want to
Wendy.
speak first?
Did we want to have a quick look at the poll before
go for it.
so we can get a quick stock check? It's good to see here that a lot of you knew at least something about this new legislation. I don't think anyone is professing to be an expert at all, which is why, like me, we're all here to learn, really. That's what it looks like so far. And just moving down here, we asked about, so let's bear in mind that we've got, what, 24 who have responded so far. And these are the types of things that you're recycling now. So we can see paper and card getting good numbers, not 100% on things, but looking pretty good there. Oh, the numbers are changing. It's exciting, isn't it? We can see down here that the one that is low and, you know, is getting all the attention here is on that food waste. And yeah, it's clear that there are some challenges along the way there. So that's how we're all looking now. I think we'll probably circulate this little poll with the video as well, so you get to have a look at that. And this is how we feel recycling is in our businesses. Obviously, this is going to be purely subjective. I'm sure folks are being very honest here. This is good to see. We're doing okay. We're doing okay. And knowing quite a few of the businesses that are on here, I know that you're doing a lot, and I know you're passionate about this. Obviously, we'd all like to be here as well, and hopefully with sessions like this and with maturing legislation, we can get there.
So Rebecca, back to you.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I own Open House Deli in central Winchester. We are a sustainably led kitchen, cafe and eco store. And in November last year, very recently, I opened a sandwich shop called Two Hands. Very, very different brand, but does carry similar values. Both businesses do actually employ less than 10 FTEs. So we are currently exempt from the compliance. However, as we've seen there, in 2027, all businesses will have to comply. So it's really good practice to start implementing some of these requirements now. I'm not an expert, as all of us, I think we are all learning. So I'm here today to also keep learning. But from day one, when we opened in 2019, it's been really important and part of our business values to be taking care of our waste. So I'm hoping that I can share some tips and tricks about what we do that you can try to implement into your business. So we focus on trying to work sustainably. What does that mean? Well, particularly reducing waste, looking after our waste, and working to make sure that we produce as little as possible. We work with local suppliers, and we really do try to work by buying locally and buying seasonally. So there's a couple of areas that I want to talk to you about today. The first is about education. That's both from a staffing perspective and also a customer perspective. Secondly, the cost to the business. We're talking about bins, bin liners, things like that. Particularly, how do we, thirdly, reduce our overall waste? What can we be doing to look at that from the business? And then lastly, what are our main issues as we look to work towards this new legislation? So interestingly, Open House Deli's landlord is the council. So we do have bins provided for us, but at Two Hands, it's a private landlord. So I've had to set up all my own bin collections. At both of them, we make sure that already our bins are all separated out. So general waste, recycling, glass, and food waste. The issue that we face at Open House Deli is that we also share the bin space with about 10 other businesses. If you know Winchester, we're down in King's Walk, and all of the King's Walk businesses share our bin area. So often we'll go down there, and this is what my staff will regularly send me to say, this is what the bin area looks like. So I think this is going to be an interesting thing, as we look at how we can work together. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Can we work with other businesses in the area? But what if they are not doing their due diligence? How do we manage that? So I'm regularly messaging my landlord and sharing these pictures with her to say, can we please work with the other businesses to make sure that this isn't happening? I do wonder, particularly with Open House Deli, whether there is an element that because we don't actually pay for our bins to be collected. You know, there's less focus on it. You know, when we don't pay for something, we don't put as much value to it. So I think the first hurdle that we're going to face as we move forward is about staff training. I have an absolutely wonderful team at the Deli who really buy into our values. And I think it's important to remember that I'm quite far along on this journey. From day one, like I said, we already implemented that our waste had to be separated. So we are knowledgeable and have that habit already ingrained in us. However, we are very often super busy in high-paced environments, trying to get food out quickly and on time. And it's in those moments that I know that things aren't being put in the correct bins. But we do things to try and reduce this. So in each section of the kitchen and front of house, we have a separate bin for each of those things. That means that we do have about 12 individual bins just for us. So you do need to have the space to do that. At Two Hands, we just have a little bin on top of each of our fridge counters where we work that we put the food waste into, and then at regular periods we take that to the back into the larger bins. At our team meetings, I am always talking about waste. I have actually been known to make members of staff pick through the bins. I know it's quite extreme, but for me, you know, there are a lot of people who simply might not care and are lazy. We use different shaped bins and different coloured bin bags. So we have a lot of people in our business who, you know, work differently. They prefer colours or shapes to help them remember. So we have round bins for the recycling, we have square bins for the food waste, we have green bin liners, we have black, you know, so tips like that can really help different members of teams to remember to separate it out. I think particularly in hospitality, we know that staff are moving quite quickly. It's a quite transient job. And so I think one of the things that we face regularly is new people coming into the business that haven't had this this system or process in place in their previous workplace. So I put it into our onboarding process, and I would really recommend anybody else doing that, making sure that if you have an onboarding paperwork, that waste is included into that. And just talking about it positively, trying to have a laugh about it, knowing that it's not a particularly exciting conversation, just trying to do some quizzes or anything like that that you can do in your staff meetings. The other hurdle in education is about the customers. If a lot of people are coming in and then they are maybe saying that they're taking away, but then they don't, they sit in and then they're disposing of their own waste. One of the biggest issues that we have particularly is mums coming in with their own packaged goods for their children, and we try and intercept as much as possible if they're handing the waste over to us, but that is waste that we are not producing, but that we still feel is our due diligence to make sure that it's being separated out correctly. But I do think there is going to have to be a huge amount of help in educating the general public about this legislation. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the cost to the business. We are a small business at Two Hands. We only have 2.5 FTEs, but it costs me about £150 to £200 a month for the bin rentals. So paying for actually having the bins on site, and then you also have to pay for the collection. So there's a day rate for the bin, and then we have a weekly collection, and so a weekly collection fee. So it is a lot of money that will have to be factored into everybody's business costs. There's also the cost of bin liners. I know it sounds ridiculous, but we use compostable bin liners to line our food waste bins. Otherwise, we find that they start to smell. You can decide not to use them, but again, you're going to regularly be washing them out, making sure that they stay nice and clean. And from a staff training perspective, again, it's just easier for us to be having a bin liner, but they are expensive. And then, of course, the actual bins for themselves, like I said, we have about 12 to 15 individual bins around the deli business to make sure that we can separate that out. And obviously, it's a small cost, but again, an initial outlay for the business. So what can we be doing as an actual business operator? The simplest is trying not to produce waste. Obviously, we'll never not produce waste, but we can work hard to ensure that we have as minimal waste as possible. So what do we do at the deli? Well, we're lucky to have a menu that is designed around as little waste as possible. So we price from our counter. People order from the counter. They choose 1, 2, or 3 salads, and then they can add additional toppers to that. So whether it's a dip, it's frittatas, it's fritters, it means that the customer chooses depending on how hungry they are. And so we have very, very little plate waste. As a team, we are continuously monitoring our pet plate waste, mainly from a visual perspective. If there's something that we see that's constantly being left on the plate, do we actually need to have it on there? Can we take it off, or can we reduce it? And what we definitely don't do is that little side garnish. How many times have you gone to a cafe or a restaurant and you've immediately removed that garnish from the side of your plate or pushed it to one side? Do you actually need it on there? And finally, if you haven't heard of the app Too Good To Go, I would strongly recommend it. I'm not going to talk about it now, but Too Good To Go, have a look into the app. The other thing that we do to really try and reduce our waste is a very, very controlled ordering system, kitchen planning, budgeting, and refined recipes. Something that we've worked really hard on for the last 18 months. As a small business, I want the team to have creativity. But for a long time, we were definitely winging it as a business. We often didn't have recipes written down, and it meant that, you know, from chef to chef, there might have been different results in the food. So now we really just order in what we need. We have very little waste. There's certainly no moldy bits of food in our fridges, but things that we do is use leftover vegetables for our vegetable stock. We actually don't peel our vegetables. We give them a good scrub, and that reduces that small amount of waste. Things like if we have a cake fail, we break it all up and we sell it on the counter as broken bits. We also, like I said at the beginning, work really hard to make sure that all of our suppliers are on the same journey with us about how they can reduce their waste. A lot of our suppliers are local, they're B Corp certified, and they are aligned with us. So we try to have confidence that our supply chain is helping that bigger picture. This is our coffee supplier. They're called River. They're based near Alresford, and they come in once a week with their coffee tubs, and we hand them back our used ones. Another thing that we do is similarly with our eggs that come in from Kingsworthy. They give us plastic trays that we hand back each week. We also work with wholesalers. For example, all of our dry packaging comes in 25 kilo bags. What that means that is we're ordering less often, so less trucks on the road, and also just overall less packaging. So I'd really recommend, if you can, do an audit of your suppliers and see if there are any switches that you can make. these are our commitments and values as our business. I'm not going to talk about each of them individually. It's not right for today, but I think as we think more and more about our waste, it's important to look at as our business as a total. So what are our main issues, both at the Deli and Two Hands? The first is Tetra Packs, something that hasn't been noted, but obviously with the rise in alternative milks, we have a huge amount of Tetra Packs that we get through. We actually take them, or my poor father takes them to the bin collection on Worthy Lane, and we put them in there so that they don't go into the general waste. But currently we cannot find a supplier that will, or a bin supplier that will take Tetra Packs. The next challenge is motivation. It's really difficult to motivate team members, even the ones who are fully invested in our values. It is going to be hard work. It's going to be a challenge. And particularly when we're also relying on other businesses in our communal bin areas. And my final challenge is about missed bin collections. So at Two Hands, we use Veolia. For the first 2 months of operating, I was on the phone every week to Veolia because of them missing our bins, because of trucks breaking down, because, oh, it wasn't booked into their warehouse. Oh, we had a temp and they didn't see you. I don't know, you know. And so every week I was on the phone. It meant that our food waste was having to go into our general waste because that was being collected. It completely defeated the point. And I don't have the time as a small business owner to be on the phone every week. It's a lot of extra admin. There's a lot more other things that need to be done. So I think it's going to be interesting, as obviously more companies are going to be taking on more businesses, how they cope with that. So that is everything from me, a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope that there was some really interesting tips and tricks in there for you, and I invite any questions that hopefully I can answer.
Thanks very much. It's an amazing business, and it's a great example of what you can do when you put your mind to it in a small business. Actually, we are quite behind schedule now, and I hope everyone's okay with that, because obviously we've had a lot of questions and hopefully had a lot of good discussion for people. So I think we'll hand straight over to Zulfiya and then wrap up with questions at the end, if we can. So Zulfiya, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for opportunity. So I represent commercial business called Biz Space. We've got 76 sites across UK, so it's quite significant and quite important why we need to adopt correct waste collection. And I'll just talk to you what we're already doing, where we are on the journey, and what we're going to change from the 31st of March. So if I might start with the history of BizSpace, so you can understand where we're coming from. So we started in 2000, so we've almost been trading 25 years, and we started as part of Safeland Group, and then it's grew. We changed our investors. So if you can see, in 2014, High Cross been purchased, and we've been sold in 2015. So Varda, who acquired us and as entire portfolio. In 2016, we relaunched and rebranded BizSpace, and we started to invest into our buildings and upgrade our buildings. So throughout the years, we recycled some of the site, we bought some other sites. So where we stand now, so if you can see the ratio of offices, industrial studios and other spaces in the chart across the portfolio, what I'm trying to say, we've got a lot of different companies. We're working with SMEs, we're working with the larger companies, and they're renting offices, studios, workshops, etc. So Customers are a key priority, so we've got a lot of customers on site, colleagues, so we're trying to train and scale them up, so just make sure that they're aware of a variety of legislations and they're able to support the businesses. As I mentioned, portfolio and product varied and always growing, and we're dealing with different systems. The part which is related to this workshop is ESG. We're quite strong on our ESG values. In 2021, we became part of Sirius PLC, which is FTSE 250 company. It's a German company. It's got 70 big workshop spaces building across Germany, and now we've got 76 sites across UK as well. So we, as you can see, we've been in industry over 20 years, so we've got huge experience. We've got over 3,500 businesses trading from our premises. We're trying to support them. We're trying to guide them. They're expanding with us. We altering the space for them. We are changing the planet, and that is a quick summary of different products we are offering. Why I'm telling you that? I'm just trying to show the size and how important for us just to be in line with the current legislations. It's not only waste recycling, there is a lot of fun activities we do to reduce carbon footprint. For example, last quarter we did really fun challenge to improve the climate and sustainability. So we created 7 teams and we did so many different fun activities to reduce the travel, to share the cars, and we put everything on stats. And as you can see, within 6 weeks period, we reduced car journeys by 18,750 kilometers. We protected 45 rainforest fields, 1.4 tons of CO2 emission being avoided, and we also managed to raise and donated £60 to Albert Schweitz Stiftung Support Animals and Food Industry. We also managing Tree Nation. So Tree Nation, it's the company who plants the trees in the places where it's needed. And we've been working with them for 3 years now. So it's a great company. And they're planting trees all across Madagascar, Tanzania, Kenya. Have a look at their website. It's quite impressive what they do. And what we're trying to do, we're planting trees for every employee's birthday, anniversaries, when new person joining in, when customer extends the contract with us, we're planting trees, and where we're traveling certain amount of mileage and we're expensing, we're planting the trees. So up to date, we successfully planted 4,854 trees, and it's growing. So what's with the waste disposal? So we also, the same as Rebecca, we're also using Veolia, but because we're using on a bigger scale across 76 sites, I would say it's more robust, and I have got good experience with them. So since October 2023, we have tried to achieve zero waste disposal to landfill, and at the next slide, I'll show you the stats from 1st of January till end of December last year. But in summary, we have Veolia collected 988.5 tons of waste, but 100% of waste which has been collected been diverted from landfill, which is phenomenal. With Veolia, we are working on modelling and implementing new, simpler recycling legislations, and we're on track to supply our sites with additional bins starting from 31st of March. I wanted to give you exact stats, but I'm still waiting for a response with Viola, where legislation just came about from November. So we're still trying to understand whether it's going to be 3 bins or 4 bins across the site, but it's definitely going to be implemented from the 31st of March, and we're going to advise all our tenants of what it's going to be and how it's going to be changed. Now, some of our sites has got food outlets and cafes. So my understanding, currently we're recycling just two streams, general waste and recycling waste, and it's already been mentioned in the previous presentation by Kirstin and Rebecca. So it's depending on the area, the recycling items can be varied. So it's exactly the same with us. So what we're recycling in Hampshire, it's going to be slightly different for their recycle, or slightly different what they're recycling in Manchester and other places. However, there is a very good simpler recycling guide for businesses, public sector and organizations and charities. I'm going to add the link into the chat so you can have a look. It's broken down and there is a lot of answers to your questions, which I've seen in the chats there. Please have a look. So an 18.92% of waste has been recycling, and now is the stat. So if you can see, we are consistent. We're already on the journey to recycle quite a lot of stuff because it's important. Some of our sites are really, really big, and we have got a lot of tenants in. So, so carbon footprint. Through our different activities and waste recycling, we have saved 177,000 of CO2, and that is within 12 months period in 2024. 611 trees planted each year, 66 cars off the road each year, and 107 houses powered each year. So that's CO2 emissions. We're also trying to see if there is any initial additional recycling opportunities, and we have identified following, which already in practice. So as of October 2024, we decided to remove all plastic bottles from our conference facilities and meeting rooms, and we're using more sustainable glass, bottles, etc. And glass bottles is the one which you can reuse, which not only a cost-saving exercise, but it's reducing significantly plastic recycling. So we adopted refurbished phones policy. So all our phones and laptops has been purchased as refurbished. So we're working with Amazon at the moment. We're open to the different ranges. However, Amazon seems to be quite a robust program for us, and it's giving 1-year warranty as well. Furniture recycling. As you can imagine, there is a lot of furniture recycling happening on site. Quite a lot of tenants deciding to relocate to the different cities or closing the business. They don't need all these tables, etc. So, and also some of our sites have got furnished options on offer. So we're renting offices fully furnished. So when the furniture is not needed, we're trying to utilize the furniture within other sites, so which proved to be very effective. We're also offering it to the customers and the charities, so which works really well. So now I'll stop sharing my presentation and just want to say thank you and see if you've got any other questions. Duncan, I think we're finishing on time.
We are. That's very well done. Thank you. So I think most of what's in the chat has been sort of comments and a bit of frustration about differences across different areas. So I think most of those comments have been addressed in the chat, particularly common comments around that frustration between different local authority areas, and hopefully that's what this legislation is going to sort out, although it's probably going to take another year or so to get there. And Tetra Paks is an example that keeps coming up, that can be recycled in some areas and not in others. I don't know if Kirstin or Wendy can answer this from what they've been reading, but it's my understanding that Tetra Paks were now going to be accepted into recycling under this legislation, but I'm not sure if you've read any different.
It's my understanding that they are as well as plastic pots, tubs and trays. But as I said, it depends on the disposal infrastructure. And I totally understand the frustration. We feel it as well. We're a collector, but we're not a disposer. So we are dependent on those disposal infrastructures being in place. And there is a general frustration across lots of local authorities that we would love to be able to recycle all of the things that we are supposed to be recycling. But until that infrastructure is in place, it's just not possible for us. However, the good thing is, and I recognise the frustration again, but I think had this legislation not come along, there wouldn't have been that pressure on the disposers to actually get it sorted out. So we potentially would have carried on drifting for many, many, many more years without having the facilities to recycle all of the things that we know can be recycled. So this legislation has pushed those disposal suppliers to have to do something about it. And although they're going to be slightly delayed in the timescales, within the next few years, we'll all be recycling the same things across all of England, which I think will be a fantastic result.
I think I was going to make a few points there, because I think we all sense that frustration. Yes, we have the legislation here, and as businesses, including our own, faced with this, we do what we do in a similar way to any other form of recent legislation, going all the way back to talking about ESOS as we did earlier. If we're unsure, we go back and we check the legislation, check the documents at source, not something that you read on social media, because as we've seen, those are not always accurate. I think for a lot of us, it's about liaising as well with our landlord, and Zulfiya is my landlord, so I'm going to be talking quite a lot more with you about that. And also with the local authority. As we get harmonisation, as we said, within those timelines there, 2026, that's quite a key timeline, and seeing harmonisation of what is collected is going to help a lot. There's a bit of don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. We want to get those recycling rates up. It ain't perfect yet, but it will be better. And again, drawing that parallel with ESOS, it wasn't perfect, and that's probably putting it mildly, but it's getting better. So as we go through the phases of that, it gets better and better. This, seems to be going through that same sort of life cycle. So it's going to hurt. It's not going to work perfectly at the beginning, but we're on that journey really. And ultimately, if you're worried about potentially getting fined, then if you want the interpretation checks, get in touch with the Environment Agency. Yeah. We do all the time with things like ESOS, and they are really responsive, and it gives you something in writing to refer back to should you need that going forward.
That's an excellent suggestion.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's now just after 11 o'clock, so we'll let you go and finish your mornings. Thank you very much to our speakers, to Wendy, Kirstin, Rebecca and Zulfiya. It's very useful insight into the work you're doing. And thank you very much, everyone. If we can have your feedback following the event, that would be really helpful.